Switch on the news and you'll see climate disasters, terrible floods and koalas burning to death in wildfires. But open up TikTok or YouTube and you can find content about climate change being a big hoax. Today, 1/3 of young people in the UK think that the threat of climate change has been over-exaggerated. But many others are so worried about climate breakdown that it's making them depressed. Is it any wonder that nobody knows what to believe? I'm Jazz and I'm a mobile hairdresser. I have some really interesting chats with people when they're in the hairdressing chair. And we often end up talking about our crazy weather or the environment.
I haven't seen so many bees this year. Really worried about it.
Really wet, isn't it? Does it feel like we're in summer?
Oh, hello! It feels like everyone is concerned one way or another about the changes we can all see happening. Hello!
Just 2 days ago, we had torrential rain for a very long period of time. That's a real problem for baby birds. It will wash them out of the nests. You don't expect to have that in our summers, do you? But I'm afraid that's what's happening.
I'm a massive animal lover, and like my hairdressing clients, I'm getting more and more worried about how climate change is affecting wildlife. But what about the claims I often see online about climate change being a hoax? Is there any truth in them? Or are they actually blocking action to tackle the biggest challenge humans have ever faced?
Hi!
Over the past few months, I've been going out to visit some people who spend a huge amount of time thinking about climate change. I've met scientists.
When you look at the vast evidence that we've assembled, and climate change is the most studied phenomena in all of human science, the only thing that can really explain it is humans have been burning fossil fuels.
Activists.
I was absolutely terrified. I was alone in a cell and I was kept in for 3 days.
And skeptics too.
Climate change is a natural event. Global warming is a man-made invention.
I discovered that everybody has one thing in common. They are all really worried about the future. They just disagree on what it is we should actually be worried about. I started my journey in Falmouth, where local artist Holly Astle recently made the climate change headlines. She's well known for the beautiful murals she's created around the town. But a few months ago, she was arrested after painting the local university with a fire extinguisher full of orange paint. I want to understand what makes someone become one of those eco-zealots we all read about in the news.
Just Stop Oil has one simple demand. It's to stop all new licensing of gas and oil in the UK, which, no-brainer really. Basically, every climate scientist is saying that we cannot have any new gas or oil infrastructure or fossil fuel infrastructure if we want a habitable planet. The government's own climate scientists, own climate change committee are literally saying we cannot have any new gas or oil. People are screaming it from every direction. I've done everything I can do within kind of legal means already. You know, I've signed so many petitions, I've written to my MP, and it just feels like without radical action, we're not getting anywhere. I started with joining in marches, and then I started blocking roads, and I glued onto Shell HQ, and I then sat in a road until I was arrested for it. And then I marched until I was arrested for it. And then I sprayed a building with paint. For me, it's this escalation of I don't know what else to do. What I'm doing feels to me morally like the right thing, like that I need to do it. I feel compelled to do this. And I could be in prison because of that. Yeah, sorry.
Before Holly, I'd never met anyone my own age who believes in something so strongly that they are prepared to risk their freedom for it. But is the message behind Just Stop Oil's headline-grabbing disruptions actually hitting home with the public? What do you think about the climate protesters who spray things orange and chuck soup on things?
Sadly, I think it alienates as much as it focuses attention.
I don't think they're doing the cause any good. Yeah, there's other ways to do it, but yeah, to make a mess of pictures and people's houses and things, that's not the way.
I'm not a fan of that whole let's scare people off attitude. I don't think that helps at all.
All it does is make people anti them.
in a very big way.
I didn't meet anyone on the streets that supports Just Stop Oil's methods, but you can't deny how desperately Holly is trying to raise the alarm about the climate crisis. Just Stop Oil aren't the only ones trying to wake us up to what's going on, and others think that we're sleepwalking into a very different disaster. One of them is Tony Bevington. He's a really interesting man who's travelled the world working as everything from a paramedic to an agricultural teacher.
Hello, guys.
It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, hi. Come on in.
Thank you.
I've met a lot of people from a lot of different cultures, and it's taught me a lot about different aspects of life. I'm a compassionate humanist, is how I would describe myself. Anxious to get people to see that there's other ways of living life, other ways of thinking, other ways of being. I've been called a conspiracy theorist. There's some people that feel that global warming is going to consume us if we don't take action, and some people feel that the government are going to consume us if we don't take action.
Is the government telling us the truth about climate change?
Ah, no. When does the government tell the truth? I came to live in Cornwall because they told me in the 70s that we were going to be running out of oil tomorrow and the world would fall apart. I don't believe a word they say. Climate change is natural. It's always gone on, and they blame human beings. I think there's an awful lot of exaggeration for political and economic reasons. We did an experiment with COVID and scared the hell out of everybody. Oh, good, you know, they do what they're told when they're frightened, so let's frighten them again. And that's what global warming is about. They want to line their pockets, get as rich as they can, as powerful as they can, crush the people as much as they can. We've reached a point, in my opinion, where the people have had enough. They're beginning to see through the facade, and something could break. It's being used as a scapegoat to frighten the people. If it is devastating, as they're saying, why on earth are the politicians behaving the way they are? All they do is frighten us with daily, weekly statements about we're all going to hell if we don't get the carbon dioxide down, and yet the British government's granted licences for oil. If you look at politicians, they're still flying everywhere in their private jets, and they're not using electric vehicles, they're using petrol and diesel vehicles. They've set one rule for us and another rule for themselves, and we're the ones that have to make the sacrifices yet again.
Skeptics like Tony, the fact that we can all see politicians failing to take climate change seriously proves that there is no climate emergency and it's all just an excuse to try and control us. But for some skeptics, the conspiracy goes much deeper. They believe the real purpose of net zero is not to reduce greenhouse gases to safe levels, but to remove all carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They think this is part of a sinister plan by the global elites to kill the world's plants and starve most of us to death. But the thing is, this only makes sense if the world's climate scientists are in on this conspiracy too, or if those that disagree are being silenced. Who really are the scientists we hear about on the news? I wanted to meet some for myself. It turned out when they weren't in their university labs, they were also actually reggae musicians, volunteers at repair cafes, rock climbers, salsa dancers, singers, and DJs.
By night, I am DJ Doom, not necessarily a prophet of doom, but a frustrated DJ and player and purveyor of fine music.
It was hard to imagine any of these people plotting to bring in an evil new world order. I started by asking about the claim that many scientists don't actually believe humans are causing climate change. Thousands of scientists disagree with the official narrative of climate change, don't they?
There have been a number of letters that have disputed some aspects of our understanding of how the climate is changing. The vast majority of the people that do sign those kind of letters, they don't have real background in climate science or the natural sciences related to the study of the Earth's climate.
Many of them, or in fact most of them, are either not scientists at all, don't have PhDs, or in completely different subjects. So in medicine perhaps, or in engineering, nothing to do with the physics of climate science.
If it's not true, we'd have found it out by now. If it wasn't actually happening and I found that out for my career, I mean, that would be amazing. But unfortunately it is. Yeah. It's rather like agreeing on gravity.
Sometimes you might hear that there is a suppression of dissenting voices when it comes to climate change. There have always been alternative ideas as to why the Earth's climate is changing, why it's getting warmer. You know, it's because of the sun, it's because of tectonic processes. There's no shortage of ideas. Every now and again there might be something published which says, oh, it's about the sun. And it will generate headlines, and it will end up on the socials, and it will whip up a bit of a storm. But when you actually look at what the research says, it explains a tiny little element of what's been going on.
So what about the idea that climate scientists are part of a conspiracy to control us?
Conspiracy theories are very comforting, and they are good stories. You know, I'm an Illuminati member who gets paid loads of money because I am a secret communist spy. That is maybe easier than thinking my grandchildren might be refugees.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Not even from war, or potentially, but because there's not enough water, because there's not enough food. That is a very frightening thought.
Let's be honest, the idea that climate scientists can all be bought and herded in one direction is an idea put forward by people who clearly never met scientists. The whole point of science is actually to essentially disagree with other people. And the best argument, the best idea wins. But you have to test it to destruction. Despite everything, despite all the increase in carbon dioxide, which we can measure, despite the massive changes in temperature we've already seen, despite the huge storms and sea level rise and storm surges and all those things which we've already seen, which are entirely predicted by the climate scientists 30, 40, 50 years ago, despite all that, there are still skeptics. And I find that quite extraordinary, how pretty well every one of our predictions have come true, and pretty well every one of the climate skeptics' predictions haven't. And yet they still won't accept it.
When my mum was my age, the big environmental threat was the ozone hole. But the world came together to solve that problem.
So if the science on the climate crisis really is so clear, why would anyone want to cause confusion and block action today? Who stands to gain from this misinformation, and where does it come from?
I'm headed to a secret location in London to meet an expert on the fake news around climate change.
Hiya, Jazz. Thank you. So every other interview we've done in people's homes, we couldn't do that with you today because why?
Yeah. People like me who research disinformation, we are quite often perceived as being enemies or people who don't want to see free speech. That has made us very vulnerable to attack, both in the sense of abuse and harassment online, but also in some more extreme cases, actual threats of violence. I've had accounts with 1 million followers on Twitter cite me as being, public enemy #1. I'm not going to be scared into silence by that because I really do believe in having good faith public debate and having a diversity of opinions about climate change. But it shouldn't be controversial to say you can't make money off lies.
What forms does climate misinformation take?
At the beginning, it was very much about denying the problem at all. So saying climate change doesn't exist, or we don't have enough data to prove it, or, the science is inconclusive, the models are faulty. But gradually, it became a lot harder to make that argument. And one of the reasons why is that real people were seeing the impacts of climate change in their everyday life. So what is happening now is a much more sophisticated and kind of complicated form of information warfare, where you might recognize at a very basic level, okay, yes, climate change exists, but we don't really know what the right solutions are, or the solutions that you're proposing are too disruptive, they're going to bankrupt the public, so maybe we should just slow down. And definitely, let's not implement really ambitious policy agendas that tackle the systemic issues. Let's just kind of tinker around the margins with some of these smaller activities which make us feel good, but actually aren't really solving the problem. Saying, yes, it's a problem, but it's not the UK's problem, it's China's problem, or it's not Cornwall's problem, it's London's problem. And then the final one, which is surrender. So basically saying climate change has escalated beyond our control and we're never going to be able to tackle it, so let's just enjoy life while we can and surrender to the apocalypse that is coming on the horizon.
Where do you think climate misinformation is coming from?
the fossil fuel industry and those with vested interests in what's called the carbon economy, so sort of our reliance on fossil fuels, they absolutely are still key actors in this space. They've spent nearly 60 years developing a tactical playbook, and they launder their ideas into the mainstream through this enormous network of PR agencies and advertising firms and think tanks and media outlets who they fund and academics who they sponsor. And I often try and describe what's happening now as the collision between that carbon economy and the attention economy. There is a competition happening across social media, across digital platforms, to harvest your likes and your clicks and your comments and your follows and your subscribes. And unfortunately, that has created really negative incentives to just spread the most controversial content or the most polarizing content, sometimes the most hateful content, because that grabs people's attention. And ultimately, your eyeballs are a way of making profit.
What sort of role do social media play in climate misinformation?
Quite recently on X, formerly known as Twitter, if you went into the search bar and typed in climate or even just CL, the first thing that the platform would show to you was hashtag climate scam. And that came above hashtag climate crisis and hashtag climate emergency. And I think that is such a good example of the fact that somebody who innocently really just wants to understand what are people talking about in relation to climate change is suddenly going to be funneled towards probably the most mis and disinformative or conspiratorial or polarizing section of that conversation taking place on social media. And it just shows you that even if you're trying your best to seek out good information, there can be flaws in the architecture of social media that make it harder and harder for that to take place.
Do you think this disinformation can actually have an impact on policies to help us fight climate change?
I do. So there is a policy idea called 15-minute cities, and it's very simple at its heart. It is the basic idea that everybody should live within 15 minutes walking distance of public services. So you can walk to a school and a hospital and a playground and leisure activities, and that it doesn't mean you're not allowed to go further, but that there is that kind of infrastructure within walking distance of your house. And it's already being implemented in really major cities like Paris and has been broadly very popular. Now, a couple of years ago, the city of Oxford decided that they wanted to implement a traffic reduction scheme. And this was conflated with the idea of 15-minute cities. And in the space of a few weeks, this has suddenly become a lightning rod for conspiracy theorists, for extremist movements to stand on the streets of Oxford, send death threats to local councillors, invade council meetings, and they reframed the idea of 15-minute cities to be 15-minute prisons. So you are going to be contained within a 15-minute walking distance of your house. The surveillance state is going to be watching you in every minute of every day. It's happening more and more, that something which starts out as a really small policy idea suddenly becomes this symbol, this transnational moment for people to push back on climate action. Those kind of conspiracies are unbelievably powerful right now because they prey on that fundamental fear that you don't have control over your life and there are people who are out to get you.
I hadn't realised how much impact conspiracy theories can actually end up having in the real world. But this could get even worse if they start to seep into politics too.
The danger is when politicians who might be in a quite desperate situation, reaching for something to try and improve their performance in the polls, their electability, they start monitoring social media. So in the UK, it's been no secret that there's a significant fraction of the Conservative Party that are pretty climate-sceptic for various reasons. And what they've done over the past 5 years or so is really seize on, in some instances, just really quite wild conspiracy theories in an attempt to try to appeal to particular voters and increase their electability.
Do politicians understand about climate change?
Some politicians do understand the science, but many of them don't. I work quite a lot, and others like me work quite a lot with politicians and political parties, hopefully in a sort of non-partisan way, to develop scientific and climate change, climate science literacy. I think it's really important that politicians anybody making decisions needs to understand what climate change is, why it's an issue, and why they need to do something about it. But there are clearly lots of people who don't understand the science, and that's, I think, a real problem.
There are tremendous incentives to maintain business as usual. Fossil fuels generate 80% of global energy demand, and centuries of fossil fuel use has concentrated tremendous wealth and power into a tiny fraction of humanity. If we were to rapidly phase out fossil fuels, that means they have to leave trillions of dollars of coal and oil and gas in the ground, and they have to basically reinvent themselves as either new companies or just walk away from all that wealth and power. And that wealth and power affects policy, affects climate policy in particular. So it's no surprise really that you see politicians finding it very difficult to propose really quite radical policies to get us off fossil fuels when it is such a direct challenge to such concentrated wealth and power.
Climate disinformation can clearly have far-reaching effects. But is the picture always so black and white? Or is there sometimes a grain of truth in conspiracy theories? I'm going to visit Claire Saunders. She's a social scientist interested in the grey areas between extreme viewpoints. Hello, I'm Jazz. Nice to meet you. How worried should we really be about misinformation?
I think we should be very worried. I think we should also be very worried about anybody who claims to have 100% certainty about something. There's never one straightforward answer, but we have to go with the best state of the art and the burden of proof. I also think that there can be a danger in branding things as misinformation that don't fit with your worldview. An example I think about quite a lot is contrails from aircraft. I know plenty of people who are like, they're definitely polluting our skies on purpose. Some people would go so far as to say it's all a plot for the New World Order to make us all infertile because they want fewer of us. But then the other side of the debate is to say, well, they're completely harmless. It's just what happens when there's high humidity and you get ice crystals forming from the fumes. But actually the burning of aviation fuel releases a really nasty chemical cocktail of pollutants. None of it's particularly good for us. We would die if we breathed it indirectly. So the truth is somewhere in between. So there is this danger of going, oh, conspiracy theories, all complete nonsense, out you go. When, you know, the alternative, oh, it's completely harmless, is also a fib.
How big is the challenge to get off of fossil fuels? Have politicians been fully transparent with us?
The fossil fuel addiction we have is absolutely immense. I mean, just look around my kitchen at the amount of stuff that's made out of fossil fuels and out of plastic, and all of the appliances and the way our whole systems are structured are around fossil fuels. I'm not sure that I know of a single academic in the world, or even a team or group of people who have been able to produce a document that says this is what our fossil-free future will actually look like. I'm not sure anybody's even like fully visioned what that means, which makes it so hard to trust that the government's telling the truth when there's just bland statements about, yeah, let's drive towards net zero. What does that mean? Everybody knows we're marching towards a climate catastrophe, but we seem unable to do anything about it. Like, how do you make sense of this bonkersness that we have in the world? Surely it's much easier to just say, oh no, everything's fine, they're making it up.
The tragic thing is, the delay in taking meaningful action against climate change means that we could end up in a future way more disturbing than the sceptics are worried about. James Dyke believes that instead of levelling with us about how urgently we need to get off fossil fuels, the politicians are playing a dangerous game.
They are continuing to try to maintain economic growth, because fossil fuels are really important for economic growth because it produces so much energy, in the belief that in the not too distant future they're also going to be able to deploy technologies which is going to remove all that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This idea that we can emit now, kind of burn now, and then we pay later. Well, it's you and younger generations that will pay later because you're going to need to develop those technologies. The Climeworks facility in Iceland has generated a lot of interest, but when you actually look at what's happening right now, that facility can sequester a maximum of around 4,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. I think that's the maximum. When you look at global emissions, then the order of 40 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide. The most that you can maybe offer those kind of high-tech solutions is maybe a few million tonnes anytime soon. There's just no evidence that they're going to scale at anything like the rate that we need them to scale to have a meaningful impact on the climate. There's a kind of a wacky races of ideas of what we could do to reduce the impacts of climate change. There's ideas that we might be able to sequester carbon dioxide in the Earth's oceans, that we could accelerate the natural weathering process by breaking up rocks and spreading that on land, that we could change the colour and the reflectivity of the Earth's surface by planting different crops or painting urban areas white, or even putting mirrors up into space. We could inject sulfurous compounds into the high portions of the atmosphere. Some of them will do something, some of them won't do anything at all. Some of them will have inadvertent consequences which could be disastrous. They could move the monsoons, they could produce extreme weather in some parts of the world. It's a massive risk. What you often don't hear is that large-scale carbon dioxide removal is going to have to last for about 200 years. And if it doesn't work, if the carbon dioxide begins to leak out or the technologies can't be deployed in the first place, then what we're going to bequeath to our future generations is a much, much warmer, much more dangerous and volatile climate, which could be potentially catastrophic for them. But we continue to burn the fossil fuels because it generates an awful lot of money. It's completely bonkers. It's just, yeah. There are tremendous incentives to go along with this kind of mainstream narrative that yes, climate is changing, yes, humans are responsible, but don't worry, we've got this, we can fix it. But the proposed solutions open up just even more risks, all at the same time when we know what we would need to do, which is to phase out of fossil fuels.
Peter Lafort agrees that relying on new technologies to solve the climate crisis is a dangerous fantasy.
There's a very compelling narrative in Hollywood movies and on TV about how we can create new technologies incredibly quickly that are going to solve everything, and we can just leave scientists and inventors to that. But the reality is that that's not how these things work. They take a long time, a lot of testing, so it's not as quick or as simple as we might believe it to be. We're already in this emergency. We already need to be taking action because things are already going to get quite bad. We're going to see more extreme weather events. We're going to see more challenges to health systems, to food systems, and nothing we invent now is going to stop that from happening.
Yet scientists trying to highlight the risks of pinning our hopes on these unproven technologies can find themselves facing abuse and threats, often coming from those with a vested interest in making sure that nothing changes.
It really does have an impact, all of this climate misinformation, on climate scientists and activists and people who understand the scale of the problem. And I experience that quite a lot. People make assumptions about why you're doing the things that you're doing and whose interests you're working in, which can be really, really difficult because the anger that you can be exposed to in this kind of work is shocking. To hear someone express that idea about you as a person, everything that you're doing, that you've dedicated your life to, being something that is coming from a place of selfishness, coming from a place of control and evil is really hard to accept. When you look in newspapers and headlines and see, eco-zealots, eco-fascists, and all of this kind of language, it makes it that much harder to do this kind of work. I'm not surprised people leave the environmental sector because it can be it can do real damage to you. But on the other side, what's the alternative? Once you know what is going on, once you're aware of where we are headed, what else are you going to do? We need to stop this misinformation and stop the attacks and pull together in the same direction, because we're all trying to make the world a better place, which sometimes seems like a trite thing to say, but it's as simple as that.
Yeah. There is a level of abuse that is targeted at climate scientists. If you are a person of colour or you are a woman, then it's usually considerably worse. I really don't like being called a bitch online. I've had colleagues who've had rape, threats and things like that. God. You're angry and you want to, send a nasty tweet to someone. It feels good. It feels satisfying, and it's very easy, I think, on social media to forget that that person is a person. Yeah. and has feelings.
But trolling and abuse aren't the only worry for scientists.
I think a lot of climate scientists are becoming very frustrated about how slow the things are happening. We're always talking about climate change. We're writing reports about why it's happening and where it's happening and what we think is going to happen in the future, and less about let's get on with it. Let's actually make those decisions and practically how do we absolutely make changes.
Today, more and more climate scientists are taking to the streets and getting involved in direct action themselves.
No more fossil fuel investment!
And maybe this is the most powerful thing they could be doing. Why would they be risking their freedom like this if it really was just a giant lie?
I'm being arrested! Science is not being listened to!
Increasingly, you are seeing those scientists be detained, arrested, prosecuted and convicted. And the sanctions are serious. The UK's got some of the world's most draconian legislation when it comes to anti-protest. You can be arrested now for walking slowly in the road, and there are professional consequences for that. So, the stakes are really high. The vast majority of academics are probably not going to undertake anything like that, but when you poll scientists and you try to gauge their level of concern, it is extremely high.
If scientists are feeling desperate about our chances of tackling climate change, what kind of message does this send to young people?
When you think about the climate and the future, how does that make you feel?
Well, annoyed, really. It's a bit like apprehensive about it, because what is going to happen, you don't know. It just makes me feel a bit worried to what we have coming in the future, like how I'm going to be able to live my life as an adult with like how everything's changing.
I struggle to actually imagine the world kind of going downhill to the amount that it will. Doesn't feel real.
Do you feel hopeful that we're going to get it under control one day?
Honestly, not really. I think there's obviously always hope, but it's quite slim.
I just don't think people care enough to do anything about it.
Do you feel that older people aren't taking, that into consideration?
They definitely just don't worry about it, so they're not going to be around in 100 years, 50 years. And we are.
As the generation with most to lose if we fail to act on climate change, it's not surprising that many young people are suffering from eco-anxiety. For others, climate misinformation can feel more comforting than the reality.
But some young people are more motivated than ever. I've come to Falmouth to meet Holly to find out what's happened since last time we met. Hi Holly, it's nice to see you again. How have things been since last time I saw you?
So I had my court case and I was found guilty. And I have been made to pay £4,000 to Falmouth University and do 60 hours of community service.
Since we've had a new government, they've already said that they're not going to licence any more oil and gas.
Yeah, Labour have got in and they have said no new fossil fuel licences, so we have met our demand. They haven't decided to revoke the licences put in by the Tory government. That was over 100 new licences they put in. So we need to be revoking those licences as well. What we're now advocating for is to come off fossil fuels by 2030. So it's a lot, it's a big ask. That is basically what does a kind of non-fossil fuel based economy look like? And it means a change in everything, but what we're looking for is a just transition within the next 6 years, which can get us off fossil fuels. It needs to be done. Whether it will be done in that time zone, it'll be an interesting one.
The penalties are getting much harsher, and a lot of activists are actually getting more jail time than people for manslaughter. Is this putting you off doing more activist work in the future?
We saw a verdict that saw 5 Just Stop Oil protesters jailed for 4 and 5 years, respectively. Government keeps saying it, our jails are full, yet they are jailing peaceful climate activists. It's madness.
Why don't Just Stop Oil activists attack places like oil terminals and things like that, and fossil fuel companies? Wouldn't that sort of get more of the general public on board with you?
So we have, is the simple answer. The first action Just Stop Oil did was at oil terminals. Media blackout. If it doesn't hit the media, no one listens. You have big marches and it doesn't get any media attention. It's the activist dilemma, isn't it? It's, do you do something more controversial to gain attention but lose kind of people's support, or do you just not get heard at all? You look at kind of any social movement of the past, whether that be the civil rights movement or the suffragettes, and what they were doing in their time was controversial. People hated them, and I just think, like, people need to realise that this is what's happened through history in order to gain the liberties we have today.
Are you getting scared that you could end up in jail too?
I mean, it's scary. It is really scary, and it definitely makes you take stock. But my fear of climate breakdown outweighs the fear of arrest. So I need to keep going. I don't see another way. It's kind of one of those things that, like, once you know, you can't unknow. And we don't have an option to stand by and let the world burn.
It makes me sad that Holly could one day end up in jail for doing something that she really believes in. But with the disruption of Just Stop Oil's actions getting more coverage than the actual message, are there any other ways of getting the public on board with strong climate action? What do you think the solution is? What do you think is going to have to happen to get people on board?
Sometimes what turns people off is they say, OK, you're saving the planet, but what about the people who live within the planet? What has been super successful in recent years is taking the issue of climate change and bringing it way down to the grassroots. Not what does this mean for the future of humanity, but actually what does it mean for you living in Leicester? What are the potential benefits of a net zero transition? What might it mean for local jobs? What might it mean for improved air quality? What might it mean for enjoying the countryside? What might it mean for the kinds of opportunities that your children have in the coming years? So not just lecturing people about climate change, but having a genuine conversation with them about what those opportunities and trade-offs might be. A huge proportion of the population are then on board with the principles of climate action and often quite excited about what that future can look like.
What if you're wrong in the way you see the whole climate narrative?
It's not for me that I'm fighting, it's for future generations. If I'm wrong, I'm punishing them too. I'm not anti-force, or what the hell, it doesn't matter to me. But it matters to me that because I care about humanity. I find that quite sad, actually. I think we need to take some action. I'm not sure how much, but if we don't have a dramatic change in the way the world is run, then we might as well give up anyway.
I am a strangely optimistic person in that I don't believe that catastrophe or collapse is inevitable. What we do matters, and I'd much rather be here now, being in a position where I could do something about it, than, let's say, my kids or my descendants at some point over the rest of this century ruining the fact that we didn't act when we knew what we needed to do. So it's a strange situation to be in. There's a sense of responsibility, but it's a responsibility that I'm very grateful for.
The status quo never feels as scary as change, even if the change is almost certainly going to deliver greater benefit for you or for your family or your community. It is much easier to fearmonger about an unknown. And that ambiguity is where so much information warfare is targeted. It preys upon the fact that there are things which we're going to have to experiment with, and there are things which haven't been fully worked out yet. And so even if the current state of affairs is really bad for people, somehow that still feels like the devil we know, versus the green transition, which feels like something kind of undefined and really difficult for average people to understand because there's so much kind of technical science and really complicated stuff that even for somebody like me who spends their whole day looking at this is really difficult to understand. We really can't assume that just because a certain percentage of the population or a majority of people believe in climate change, that our job is done. Because there is such a long way to go from understanding that a problem exists and actually dealing with that problem in a substantive way. And that's where the information warfare is, and that's where the battle lies ahead.
For people my age, what we do or don't do today about climate change really matters. The confusion and lies spread for so long to protect fossil fuel profits means we've lost crucial decades to act. Breaking our addiction to oil and gas is not going to be easy, and there are important questions to be asked about how we're going to do it. But we're going to have to stop attacking the people who are trying to help move us forwards. If we don't, we may soon live to regret it. What can you do to avoid climate misinformation? Head to cornwallclimate.org for some top tips to help be sure that what you are reading is genuine. And check out the series of short films I've made looking more in depth at some of the most common areas of climate change confusion.